The briefing room on level 27 of Cheyenne Mountain had survived Goa'uld attack alerts, replicator threat assessments, Ori Crusade strategy sessions, and no fewer than 14 visits from IOA representatives who made everyone in the building want to volunteer for off-world assignment. It had not, in the collective memory of the SGC's administrative staff, ever gone this quiet this fast. Major General Jack O'Neill stood at the head of the table holding a single sheet of paper the way a man holds a live grenade he isn't entirely sure is armed. He read it once. He read it again. He set it down, picked up his coffee mug, found it empty, and set it back down with the careful precision of someone choosing not to throw it. "Carter," he said. Lieutenant Colonel Samantha Carter looked up from her tablet. "Sir. Tell me this says what I think it says." Carter had already read it. Twice. "A formal Pentagon inspection request, sir. Routed through the Department of Defense, Joint Chiefs Liaison Office, signed by the Deputy Secretary of Defense, requesting a comprehensive tour of Stargate Command facilities for General Stephen Austin, USAF, for stars, accompanied by one civilian OSI consultant." She paused. "And family." "Family," O'Neill repeated. "That's what it says, sir. We have a Stargate." "Yes, sir. We have alien weapons, a room full of recovered Goa'uld technology, and Daniel's office, which I'm pretty sure violates about 6 health codes." "All accurate, sir." O'Neill picked up the paper again. "Stephen Austin. OSI." He said it slowly, like a man who recognized a name from a file he'd read a long time ago and hadn't expected to see resurface. "Carter, pull me everything we have on a Colonel, apparently now General, Stephen Austin. OSI operative. U.S. Air Force. Former astronaut, test pilot. There was a crash, early 70s. Experimental aircraft." Carter's fingers were already moving on the tablet. The SGC's internal database was extensive. It held files on virtually every senior military figure and intelligence operative in the American defense establishment, cross-referenced against Gate program security assessments. The name returned a result in under 4 seconds. Carter read the summary. Then she read it again. "Sir," she said, with the careful tone she reserved for things that genuinely surprised her, which was rarer than most people realized. "His file is heavily redacted. What we can see indicates he survived the crash with extensive injuries, was reconstructed using experimental OSI technology, and has been active as a field operative ever since. The reconstruction is described as," she scrolled, "bionic replacement of the right arm, both legs, and the left eye. Government cost approximately $6 million at time of operation. His operational record is classified above our current cross-clearance level, but the summary indicates he's been active for decades." O'Neill was quiet for a moment. Outside the briefing room, the distant sound of the gate room filtered through the walls, the routine hum of a facility that spent its days sending teams to other worlds and hoping they came back. A normal Tuesday at Cheyenne Mountain. "So he's a cyborg," O'Neill said. "The preferred terminology from the file appears to be bionic operative, sir. He's a cyborg general with a Pentagon inspection request and family in tow." That would be the accurate summary, yes. TLC, who had been sitting with characteristic stillness at the far end of the table, spoke for the first time. "This individual's physical enhancements, are they of ancient origin?" "OSI. Office of Scientific Intelligence. Strictly terrestrial, as far as we know." Carter set the tablet down. "The technology is from the early 1970s. Sophisticated for its era, but not ancient, not Goa'uld. Mechanical and electronic augmentation of organic tissue. His bionic eye has telescopic and infrared capability. His arm and legs provide strength and speed far beyond normal human parameters." "Huh," O'Neill said. He sat down. This was a specific kind of sitting down, the kind that meant he was genuinely thinking rather than performing the act of thinking for the benefit of people watching. So we have a decorated war hero, test pilot, astronaut, and long-serving classified operative who has been working for a branch of U.S. intelligence since before we found the gate, and he's just requested a tour of the most classified facility on Earth. With family, Carter added. With family. Does the request specify? Jaime Sommers is listed as the OSI civilian consultant. Carter pulled up a second file, thinner but similarly redacted. Former tennis professional. So he's bringing his bionic fiancée to look at our alien gate. It would appear so. And Oscar Goldman? Is Oscar Goldman on this list anywhere? Carter checked. There's a notation of one additional DoD advisor cleared for the visit. Name is redacted. It's Goldman, O'Neill said, with the certainty of a man who had made peace with the universe's sense of humor long ago. All right. Here's where we are. This inspection request is legitimate. It has the right signatures, the right routing, the right clearance levels. Legally and procedurally, I can't simply refuse it without kicking it up to the Pentagon, which would take 3 weeks and generate 17 memos, and we'd end up showing him around anyway. He stood. So here's what we do. We brief General Austin at the appropriate level. We give him a tour. We keep the active gate operations as quiet as possible during his visit, we make sure Daniel doesn't show him anything that glows until we know him better, and we assess whether he can be read into the full program. Carter nodded slowly. And if the gate activates during the tour? O'Neill smiled the particular smile that meant the answer was not simple. Then we deal with it. TLC inclined his head. General Austin is described as a man of considerable capability and discretion. Perhaps the greater question is not whether he can be trusted with this knowledge, but whether this knowledge is ready for him. The gate room hummed below them. Somewhere in the mountain, an unscheduled diagnostic was running on the iris controls. A normal Tuesday. O'Neill picked up his empty coffee mug one more time, stared into it, and set it down with finality. Someone get me coffee and get me Austin's full service record, in that order. He headed for the door. And tell the gate room to look presentable. We're having company. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Indeed. They arrived at the surface checkpoint at 0900 hours with the quiet efficiency of people who had spent their professional lives walking into classified facilities and making the security personnel nervous without appearing to try. General Stephen Austin moved like a man 20 years younger than his rank suggested, which was itself a function of bionics nobody at the checkpoint was cleared to know about. He was broad-shouldered, easy in his bearing, with the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades in cockpits and field operations and learned that unnecessary movement was wasted energy. His uniform carried 4 stars and a service record's worth of ribbons that stopped just short of telling the full story, which was the point. He shook hands with the surface security officer with his left hand, a habit so ingrained it had become invisible, and presented his identification with the practiced ease of a man who had done it 10,000 times. Jaime Sommers walked beside him with the kind of athletic grace that suggested her physical capability was entirely natural, which was precisely the impression OSI training had taught her to project. Her civilian credentials identified her as a DoD consultant with appropriate clearances. She wore her hair down and carried a leather bag that contained, among other things, a small OSI-issue communications unit and absolutely nothing that would alarm a standard security sweep, because she had done this before and knew exactly what standard security sweeps looked for. The third member of their party was a trim man in his 60s with silver hair, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the expression of someone perpetually calculating the cost-benefit ratio of every situation he entered. Oscar Goldman, identified on his visitor credentials as a senior DoD advisory consultant, had authorized more classified operations than most generals ever knew existed. He surveyed the Cheyenne Mountain entrance with the calm assessment of a man who had sent his 2 best operatives into situations considerably more dangerous than a military facility tour, and felt, for the first time in recent memory, genuinely uncertain about what he was walking into. Bigger than I expected, Jaime said quietly, looking up at the mountain. It's mostly underground, Oscar said. How far underground? That, said a voice from the interior doorway, is one of the more interesting things about this place. Jack O'Neill had a gift for arriving in a room at the precise moment that established he was in charge without requiring him to announce it. He extended his hand to Austin with the directness of one career military officer meeting another, skipping the performance that junior officers sometimes felt compelled to add. General Austin. Major General Jack O'Neill. Welcome to Cheyenne Mountain. Austin shook with his left hand, smooth as water. General O'Neill. Good to finally put a face to the facility. This is Jaime Sommers, OSI consultant, and Oscar Goldman, my DoD advisor. O'Neill shook hands with both, clocking Jaime's grip with the practiced unconscious assessment of someone who had spent years in special operations and knew what a trained operative's handshake felt like. It felt like someone being careful not to break his fingers, which was interesting. Goldman he read as intelligence background, analyst or handler, the kind of man who ran operations rather than conducting them. He filed all three assessments away behind a face that expressed only professional courtesy. We've got a briefing room set up on level 11, O'Neill said, leading them toward the elevator. We'll start with an overview, then work down to the operational levels. I do want to be straightforward with you before we begin, General. There are layers to this facility, and how deep the tour goes depends on a conversation we need to have at the top. Austin nodded, no sign of offense. Understood. I've been read into enough programs to know how this works. Good. Makes my morning easier. The elevator descended. Jaime stood close to the wall and said nothing, but her right ear, beneath her hair, was doing what it always did in new environments, sorting the acoustic landscape of the facility the way a musician hears individual instruments in an orchestra. She catalogued the sound of the elevator's mechanical systems, the ventilation, the distant footsteps of personnel on other levels. And beneath all of it, something else. A low harmonic that didn't match any mechanical system she could identify. It wasn't loud. It wasn't alarming. It was simply present, like a note held at the edge of hearing, vibrating in the bones of the mountain itself. She glanced at Steve. He was watching O'Neill with the relaxed attention of a man conducting his own assessment. He hadn't heard it. His bionics didn't extend to hearing. She made a mental note and said nothing. Level 11's briefing room held Carter, TLC, and Dr. Daniel Jackson, who had been told to look approachable and was managing it with moderate success. The introductions were brief and professional. Carter shook hands with Jaime with the particular interest of one scientist meeting someone whose biology represented an engineering challenge she hadn't yet been given permission to study. Daniel smiled with genuine warmth. TLC inclined his head with the gravity of a man who had served false gods for a century and assessed new individuals accordingly. Oscar Goldman looked at TLC for a moment longer than the others. The Jaffa's bearing was unmistakable to anyone who had spent a career evaluating field operatives. This was not a man who had spent his life behind a desk. The gold emblem on his forehead was not something Goldman had encountered in any briefing. He filed it and moved on, because that was what you did. O'Neill sat at the head of the table and opened his hands in the universal gesture of a man about to say something that required careful listening. General Austin, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room until we've completed a formal read-in process. What you're about to hear is going to recontextualize some things you thought you understood about the world. He paused. How's your morning been so far? Austin almost smiled. Manageable. Good. Because it's about to get more interesting. O'Neill nodded to Carter. Colonel. Carter pressed a control on the briefing room display. The screen behind her illuminated with an image that had changed the course of human history, a ring of alien stone, covered in symbols, 9 chevrons locked in silence around its circumference, waiting. This, Carter said, is a Stargate. The silence that followed Carter's opening statement had a specific quality that the SGC's senior staff had learned to recognize over years of conducting initial briefings. It was the silence of intelligent people recalibrating. Not shock exactly, people with Austin and Goldman's clearance levels had encountered enough classified programs that the concept of world-altering secrets had lost its power to produce simple open-mouthed surprise. It was something more considered than that. It was the silence of people who were very good at their jobs suddenly understanding that the job was larger than they had known. Austin leaned forward slightly, studying the image on the screen. His bionic eye made imperceptible adjustments, focal length, contrast, detail resolution, cataloging the gate's chevron configuration, the material composition visible in the photograph's texture, the scale implied by the personnel visible at its base. He had looked at classified technology his entire career. He knew the difference between human engineering pushing at its limits and something that operated on different principles entirely. The silence that followed Carter's opening statement had a specific quality that the SGC's senior staff had learned to recognize over years of conducting initial briefings. It was the silence of intelligent people recalibrating. Not shock exactly, people with Austin and Goldman's clearance levels had encountered enough classified programs that the concept of world-altering secrets had lost its power to produce simple open-mouthed surprise. It was something more considered than that. It was the silence of people who were very good at their jobs suddenly understanding that the job was larger than they had known. Austin leaned forward slightly, studying the image on the screen. His bionic eye made imperceptible adjustments, focal length, contrast, detail resolution, cataloging the gate's chevron configuration, the material composition visible in the photograph's texture, the scale implied by the personnel visible at its base. He had looked at classified technology his entire career. He knew the difference between human engineering pushing at its limits and something that operated on different principles entirely. The Stargate was the latter. You could see it in the proportions, in the material, in the way it simply existed in the image without apology. "How old is it?" he asked. His voice was level. "The one in our gate room was buried under Giza approximately 10,000 years ago," Carter said. The network itself was constructed by a race we call the Ancients, the Alterans, somewhere in the range of 50 million years ago. There are hundreds of thousands of gates distributed across multiple galaxies. Oscar Goldman took off his glasses, cleaned them with a cloth from his jacket pocket, and put them back on. It was a gesture Steve recognized as Oscar's equivalent of a deep breath. And it functions as a transportation device. A wormhole generator, Carter confirmed. 7 symbols lock a specific spatial address. The gate establishes a stable Einstein-Rosen bridge. Matter is dematerialized on this end and rematerialized at the destination gate. Travel time is effectively instantaneous. The wormhole is stable for approximately 38 minutes per connection. "You've used it," Austin said. It wasn't a question. SG teams have been conducting off-world missions since 1997, O'Neill said. "We currently have an active mission program spanning 2 galaxies and diplomatic relationships with multiple alien civilizations." Jaime, who had been quiet since the briefing began, spoke for the first time. "Multiple galaxies," she repeated. "Milky Way and Pegasus, primarily," Carter said. "We have a permanent expedition base in the Pegasus galaxy, a city called Atlantis, built by the Ancients. And an ongoing deep space mission aboard an ancient vessel called Destiny that is currently operating several billion light-years from Earth." The room was quiet again. Outside, the mountain hummed around them, indifferent to the weight of what was being described. Goldman looked at O'Neill directly. "How long has this program existed without broader governmental knowledge?" "The gate was first activated in its current form in 1994, O'Neill said. "The ongoing program has been running since 1997. Congressional oversight exists through a small classified committee. The decision to maintain operational security at this level was made at the highest levels of government and has been reviewed and reaffirmed multiple times." He met Goldman's eyes without flinching. "We're not rogue, Mr. Goldman. We're careful. Goldman absorbed this with the expression of a man who had spent his career making similar arguments about OSI programs and recognized both the validity and the limitations of that justification. Austin sat back. He looked at TLC, who had remained still throughout the briefing with the patience of someone for whom large revelations had ceased to be surprising. "And you," Austin said. "You're not from Earth." "I am Jaffa," TLC said. "I was born on the world Chulak. I served for many years as First Prime, the senior warrior, of a Goa'uld System Lord named Apophis, whom I believe to be a god. I have since learned otherwise and have served with SG-1 for many years." Austin studied him. "The symbol on your forehead. It marks me as the property of the false god Apophis. I have chosen to retain it as a reminder of what I once was and what I now oppose." Austin was quiet for a moment, and then he nodded, once, with a respect that was entirely genuine. One warrior recognizing another's scars and their meaning. O'Neill watched this exchange and filed the data point. Austin was adaptable. He hadn't reached for argument or denial or the defensive skepticism that sometimes gripped people through the early stages of a gate briefing. He was processing, assessing, and moving forward. It was the response of a field operative, not a bureaucrat. "I want to ask about something," Jaime said. She was looking at Carter with an expression that combined professional curiosity with something more personal, the look of someone who recognized a kindred experience without yet knowing how to name it. "The technology in your facility. Some of the equipment we passed in the corridor on the way here. The power readings." She paused. "I can hear certain frequencies that fall outside normal human range. I've been hearing something since we entered the mountain. A low harmonic. It's consistent and it's not mechanical in any way I can identify." Carter's expression sharpened with interest. "Your bionic ear is sensitive enough to detect that. It's been getting clearer as we've come deeper into the mountain." Carter looked at O'Neill briefly. He gave the minimal nod that meant proceed with appropriate disclosure. "What you're likely detecting," Carter said carefully, "is residual energy output from Naquata-based technology in the lower levels. Naquata is a mineral compound that doesn't exist naturally on Earth's surface in any significant quantity. It's the primary material component of Stargates and most of the alien technology we work with here. It produces a distinctive low-frequency electromagnetic signature when it's in proximity to power sources." Jaime processed this. "My ear is picking up alien mineral radiation." "Essentially, yes." Jaime said, which was a more restrained response than the situation perhaps deserved, but she had been trained by Oscar Goldman and had learned that underreaction was usually the more tactically useful choice. Austin was looking at Carter now with the focused attention he gave to things that mattered. "You said the ancients built the gate network. What happened to them?" "They evolved," Carter said. "Beyond physical form. They exist now as energy beings on a higher plane of existence. They're still present, in a sense, but they operate under a strict non-interference policy regarding the physical universe." She paused. "Most of the time." "And the threats?" Austin said. "You mentioned diplomatic relationships. That implies parties that aren't diplomatic." "The Goa'uld," O'Neill said, and something in his voice changed, not dramatically, but enough that everyone in the room felt it. "Parasitic aliens. They take human hosts, pose as gods, have been enslaving human populations across the galaxy for thousands of years. We've been at war with them, in varying degrees, since this program began." Austin was quiet for 3 seconds. "Parasitic. As in a symbiote organism that enters a human host through the back of the neck, wraps around the brain stem, and takes complete control of the body," O'Neill said. "The host is aware of everything but unable to act. The Goa'uld uses the host's body indefinitely." He let that sit. "There are also the Ori, ascended beings who feed on worship and have been conducting a galaxy-wide religious crusade. The Wraith, in the Pegasus galaxy, who feed on human life force. And the replicators, which are self-replicating nanite constructs that consume technology and adapt to any weapon used against them. The list landed in the room with the weight of things that could not be unlearned. Goldman looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at O'Neill. "General. I want to ask you a direct question and I'd like a direct answer. I'll do my best. Why are you telling us this? The full read-in, the detailed briefing, you could have given us a surface tour and a sanitized overview. Why the real picture?" O'Neill was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, there was no performance in it. Because you both have been living as classified technology for decades. You've been operated on, rebuilt, deployed, and kept under wraps by your government in the name of national security since before most of my gate teams were born. You know what it is to be the secret inside the secret. He looked from Goldman to Austin to Jaime. And because whatever's coming next, I'd rather have people like you knowing the truth than finding out the hard way on level 28. Austin held his gaze. What's on level 28? O'Neill stood. Let me show you. The elevator descended through the mountain with the particular gravity of a mechanism that understood its own significance. Level 11 to level 28 was not a long journey in terms of physical distance, but it was the kind of distance that couldn't be measured in floors. Austin tracked the descent with the unconscious precision of a man whose spatial awareness had been recalibrated by bionics and field experience. 17 seconds, mechanical cable system, weight rated for heavy equipment transport, the slight electromagnetic interference increasing with each level as the Naquata signature Jaime had identified grew stronger and more defined. She was standing slightly apart from the others, her head tilted perhaps 2 degrees to the right in a way that someone who didn't know her wouldn't notice. Steve noticed. She was listening to the mountain the way she listened to everything. Sorting signal from noise, filing what mattered, discarding what didn't. The harmonic she'd identified in the briefing room was louder now. Not loud enough to be uncomfortable, but present the way a held musical note is present, filling space without announcing itself. The elevator stopped. The doors opened onto a corridor that felt different from the administrative levels above. Wider, with conduit banks running the ceiling in organized clusters, lighting that was slightly cooler in color temperature, and a floor that carried the faint vibration of systems operating at significant power levels below. 2 airmen in full kit stood at the corridor junction. They came to attention for O'Neill and assessed the visitors with the professional neutrality of people trained to look comfortable while being extremely alert. O'Neill led them left, toward a set of blast doors that were, Steve noted, considerably more substantial than standard military installation security. The kind of doors that were designed not merely to slow unauthorized entry but to survive things that standard military installations were not designed to survive. The gate room is through here, O'Neill said. He placed his hand on a control panel. The doors unsealed with a sound that was more felt than heard, a deep mechanical exhalation, pneumatic pressure releasing, followed by the precise engagement of the inner door system. When we go in, I'm going to ask you to stay on the ramp initially. There's a protocol for first entry and I'd appreciate you following it, not because I don't trust your judgment, but because the gate room has operational parameters that apply to everyone regardless of rank. Austin nodded. Understood. The inner doors opened. The gate room presented itself the way it always did for first-time visitors, with a complete and total disregard for the viewer's capacity to process it. The Stargate stood in its housing with the simple, enormous authority of something that had existed before human civilization had learned to write. 9 chevrons. Alien symbols. Naquata gray, smooth and ancient and present. The metal ramp leading up from the floor to the gate's event horizon threshold. The control room window above, where a technician was visible running what appeared to be a routine diagnostic. Oscar Goldman stopped walking. Jaime made a sound that was not quite a word. Steve Austin stood at the base of the ramp and looked at the gate with his bionic eye fully engaged, telescopic resolution pulling the surface detail of the chevrons, the microtexture of the Naquata, the geometric precision of the symbol ring, and for a long moment said absolutely nothing. His eye was doing what it was built to do, cataloging and processing, but there was something underneath the professional assessment that was not professional at all. It was the response of a man who had flown experimental aircraft at the edge of the atmosphere, who had walked on missions that didn't exist in any official record, who had believed for his entire adult life that he had seen the outer boundaries of what the world contained. He had not. "It goes to other planets," he said. Not a question this time either. More like a man confirming an internal calculation. "Hundreds of thousands of them," Carter said from beside him. She had stationed herself at his right. The scientist in her could not resist positioning herself adjacent to the person most likely to ask the questions she found most interesting. The Gate network covers the Milky Way comprehensively, with extensions into Pegasus, Ida, and several other galaxies. Each address is a unique spatial coordinate. You dial 7 symbols, the gate establishes a wormhole, and you step through. And you step out on the other side. 38 minutes maximum connection time. One way. Matter only travels in the direction of the established wormhole. You can't travel back through the same connection, you have to dial a return address from the destination gate. Austin walked slowly up the ramp. O'Neill watched him but didn't intervene. There were people who approached the gate with awe and people who approached it with assessment, and the best people O'Neill had ever worked with managed both simultaneously. Austin was doing exactly that. His hand came up and stopped just short of the Nequata surface, not touching, respecting the protocol he'd been asked to observe, but close enough that the faint electromagnetic field of the gate's passive state interacted with the electronic components of his bionic arm. He felt it immediately. Not pain, nothing like pain. A resonance. The gate's passive Nequata field and the electronic systems of his bionic arm were producing a low-level feedback that moved up through the arm's neural interface and registered as sensation. Warmth, almost. Presence. As if the gate was acknowledging something. He pulled his hand back slowly and looked at Carter. "It reacted to you," she said. She had seen his expression change. Or more accurately, your bionic systems reacted to it. The gate's Nequata field is always active at a low level even when the gate isn't dialing. Most people don't perceive it at all. But electronic systems in close proximity can develop a resonance with it. She paused, working through the implications in real time. Your arm's neural interface is essentially a very sophisticated electronic system integrated with organic tissue. I'd need to run some tests to understand the mechanism fully, but what you're experiencing isn't dangerous. It's familiar, Austin said. Carter looked at him. Familiar? It feels like something I've encountered before. He stepped back from the gate, turning the sensation over in his mind. When I was in the field. There were 2 incidents. Classified operations, I can't give you full details without authorization, where I was in proximity to technology that our people couldn't identify or explain. Same sensation. Same resonance in the arm. O'Neill and Carter exchanged a glance that Austin caught. You're going to want to tell me what that means, he said. It might mean, Carter said carefully, that in the course of your previous field operations, you encountered alien technology without knowing what it was. Goa'uld devices, possibly, they use Nequata as a base element. Or something of ancient origin. She paused. It's not uncommon. There's more alien technology present on Earth's surface than most people realize, most of it buried or unrecognized. OSI would have encountered it eventually. From the base of the ramp, Jaime spoke. Her voice was precise and a little distant, the tone she used when her bionic ear was doing most of the work. There's something happening. Everyone turned. The gate, she said. It's changing. The sound is changing. That harmonic, it's shifting frequency. Something is engaging in the system. The control room window above them suddenly showed increased activity. The technician had straightened in his chair, hands moving to his console. A second technician appeared from the side corridor at a controlled jog. The gate room speakers activated. General O'Neill, we have an unscheduled off-world activation. Incoming wormhole. No IDC received yet. O'Neill's expression didn't change dramatically, but every member of SG-1 in the room moved to a position that was not obviously tactical but was. Carter was already heading for the control room stairs. TLC had placed himself between the gate and the visitors with the unhurried precision of a man who had been doing exactly this for years. The chevrons began to lock. Chevron 1, encoded. Austin watched the first symbol engage with the focused attention of a pilot watching an instrument panel in deteriorating conditions, total comm, total information intake, no wasted reaction. Chevron 2, encoded. The kawoosh was coming. The unstable vortex that preceded wormhole establishment, the event that disintegrated anything in its immediate path and had ended more than one career in the gate room when protocols weren't followed. You'll want to step back from the ramp, O'Neill said to Austin. No urgency in his voice, but complete seriousness. Austin stepped back to stand beside Jaime and Oscar at the base of the ramp. Oscar Goldman had his hands clasped behind his back and was watching the gate with the expression of a man filing everything for a report he was not yet sure he'd be authorized to write. Chevron 3, encoded. Steve, Jaime said quietly. I see it. Chevron 4, encoded. The gate room's emergency lighting shifted to amber, standard protocol for unscheduled activation, not a threat indicator but a readiness marker. Armed SF personnel took positions at the room's entry points with the smooth efficiency of a drill they had run more times than they could count. Chevron 5, encoded. Is this normal? Goldman asked, at a volume intended only for Austin. According to O'Neill's face, Austin said, watching the general at the base of the control room stairs, it's not abnormal. He's not concerned. He's interested. Chevron 6, encoded. Carter's voice came over the gate room speakers from the control room above. General, we're getting partial IDC. Signal is degraded, looks like the transmitter may be damaged. I'm reading SG-9's code but it's fragmented. SG-9 isn't due back for 6 hours, O'Neill said. No sir. Which is why this is interesting. Chevron 7, locked. The kawoosh erupted, the unstable vortex of energy that preceded every established wormhole, the signature visual event of the Stargate program, a wall of contained light and force that bloomed outward from the gate center and then snapped back into the shimmering vertical pool of the event horizon. The wormhole, established. Blue-white, impossibly beautiful, a window to somewhere else entirely. Jaime's hand found Steve's arm. Not fear, not quite, but the instinct of someone reaching for an anchor when the world reconfigures around them. He didn't move. He was watching the event horizon with his bionic eye fully extended, trying to see through it, understanding on a physiological level that it did not work that way and doing it anyway because it was what you did when something impossible presented itself and you were the kind of person who always looked. From the event horizon, something came through. Not a person. Not cleanly, anyway. It was a figure, moving at the edge of controlled, one arm extended for balance, the other pressed to its side in a way that indicated injury. It cleared the event horizon and hit the metal ramp and went down hard, one knee first, then catching itself, and the gate room lights revealed a man in SGC field gear, BDU jacket torn at the shoulder, P90 gone, face carrying the specific expression of someone who had made it back from something that had nearly not allowed it. The wormhole disengaged behind him with its characteristic sound, the withdrawal of something vast and immediate. The SF personnel had weapons up and then lowered them in the same breath as they confirmed SGC identification. Medical was already being called from the control room. O'Neill was moving toward the ramp. The man on the ramp looked up at the gate room and then at the unfamiliar faces standing at the base of the ramp, Austin, Sommers, Goldman, and then at O'Neill, with an expression that contained equal measures of relief and something that was going to become a very long debrief. "Sir," he said. His voice was rough. "P4X-774 has a problem." "What kind of problem?" O'Neill said. The man on the ramp managed the expression of someone choosing the most accurate word from a very difficult set of options. "Goa'uld," he said. The gate room was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then it was not quiet at all. The debrief happened fast, the way SGC debriefs always happened when a man came through the gate bleeding and the word Goa'uld had been spoken in front of visitors who were still processing the existence of the gate itself. Dr. Carolyn Lamb appeared from the infirmary corridor within 90 seconds of the alert, assessed the returning operative, Sergeant Marcus Webb, SG-9's junior field member. With the efficient calm of someone who had seen worse and knew immediately that this was serious but survivable. Webb was walking under his own power, which was the first good sign. The second good sign was that he was talking, clearly and coherently, which meant the injury was physical rather than neurological. O'Neill pulled Carter aside at the base of the control room stairs while Lamb worked. "What do we know about P4X-774? SG-9 was conducting a diplomatic assessment," Carter said, pulling up the mission file on her tablet with the speed of someone who kept their files organized because their life had occasionally depended on it. "Agrarian population, pre-industrial, human, one of the Goa'uld seeded worlds. No active Goa'uld presence detected on MALP survey. The population has a gate but uses it rarely. SG-9's objective was preliminary cultural contact and assessment for potential alliance." She paused. "The MALP data is from 3 weeks ago. If a Goa'uld force arrived after the survey, then we send our team into a situation that changed without us knowing," O'Neill finished. "Where's the rest of SG-9? Carter's expression provided the answer before her words did. "Webb came through alone, sir." The gate room settled into the specific kind of controlled urgency that distinguished it from panic. Everyone moving with purpose, no wasted motion, the machine of the SGC engaging the way it had been built to engage when its people were in trouble. Austin observed this from the position he had taken near the wall, instinctively out of the way of working personnel, instinctively positioned where he could see everything. Jaime was beside him. Oscar had moved to a point near the blast doors where he could see both the gate and the control room window simultaneously, the handler's position, the man who assessed the whole board. Webb, sitting on a medical gurney that Lamb had produced from somewhere, was talking through the situation with the focused urgency of a man who knew the clock was running. O'Neill crouched beside the gurney, listening. Austin couldn't hear the words from where he stood, but he could read the body language of both men clearly enough. Webb was describing something that had gone wrong quickly, and O'Neill's responses were the minimal affirmatives of someone absorbing tactical information without interrupting its delivery. Jaime, however, could hear every word. Her bionic ear had sorted the gate room's ambient noise, the ventilation, the residual electronic hum of the Goa'uld systems, the footsteps and equipment sounds of the personnel moving around them. And had isolated Webb's voice from 12 meters away with the precision of a directional microphone. She listened without changing her expression, because Oscar had trained her better than that, and because the content of what she was hearing required a calm face. SG-9 had arrived on P4X-774 to find the village they'd assessed 3 weeks earlier significantly changed. A Hatak, a Goa'uld mothership, was in low orbit. The fields around the village showed evidence of recent staff weapon fire. The population was consolidated in the village center under Jaffa Guard, the systematic organization of a people being prepared for something, and the SG-9 team leader, Captain Reeves, had made the call to attempt extraction of the team rather than engage. The attempt had partially succeeded. Webb had made the gate. Reeves and 2 others had not. "Steve," Jaime said quietly. "I heard enough," Austin said. He hadn't heard anything, he was reading her face. She kept her voice low. 3 SGC personnel are being held on that planet by Jaffa soldiers working for a Goa'uld. The population of the village, she didn't give a number but from context it sounds like several hundred people, are being rounded up. Webb thinks they're being prepared for transport. As hosts, or as labor. Austin was quiet for a moment. Transport to where? He doesn't know. The Hatak was still in orbit when he ran. Oscar had drifted close enough to hear this exchange. He looked at Austin with the expression he used when he was not going to say what he was thinking because what he was thinking was not useful yet. Steve had been reading that expression for decades and understood it precisely. We are observers here, this is not our operation, do not get ahead of yourself. Steve understood the instruction. He also understood that 3 people were being held on another planet by something that called itself a god and had the firepower to back the claim, and that the gate 30 feet away could put a response team on that planet in seconds if someone chose to dial the address. O'Neill stood from beside the gurney and looked at the gate room with the expression of a man running simultaneous calculations. Personnel, equipment, tactical options, timeline, and somewhere in there, 3 visitors who were standing in his gate room when this happened and who now knew more than they had known 20 minutes ago. He walked to Austin directly. I need to ask you something and I need an honest answer. Go ahead, Austin said. What you just watched happen, Webb coming through, the debrief, you've connected the pieces. You know what we're looking at. Hostile force on an inhabited planet. Your people in custody. Time-sensitive extraction situation. That's the shape of it, yes. O'Neill studied him. I'm putting a team together in the next 15 minutes. SG-1 plus whatever assets I can pull on short notice. The situation on that planet is going to require speed, discretion, and the ability to handle Jaffa in the field. He paused. I am not asking you to come. I want to be clear about that. You're here on an inspection tour and none of what's happening is your obligation. Austin met his eyes. But, O'Neill said, with the directness of a man who had long since stopped pretending the word didn't exist, I have seen your service record. The parts I'm cleared to see. And I'm looking at 2 individuals with physical capabilities that exceed standard field parameters and operational experience that my people don't have time to acquire before this window closes. He glanced at Jaime briefly, then back to Austin. I'm not asking. I'm informing you of what I'm facing and leaving the decision where it belongs. Austin looked at Jaime. She had that specific expression she wore when her opinion was already formed and she was giving him the courtesy of the pause. 3 people in Jaffa custody, she said. Several hundred civilians being loaded for transport. She let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to. What's there to decide? Oscar Goldman made a sound that might have been the beginning of an objection. Austin looked at him. Oscar, he said. I know, Goldman said. He removed his glasses and cleaned them again. I know. He put them back on. You're going to need a GDO. O'Neill almost smiled. We'll issue equipment at the armory. Level 19, this way. He was already moving. Carter, get SG-1 geared up. Tell TLC to pull Jaffa tactical files on the System Lords currently active in that sector. I want to know who we're dealing with before we step through. He glanced back at Austin and Jaime as he moved. And someone get our guests P90s. I have a feeling they know how to use them. I prefer something with a little more stopping power, Austin said, following. We have that too, O'Neill said. Welcome to the SGC. Try to keep up. The armory on level 19 was organized with the compact efficiency of a facility that equipped teams going to places where the wrong gear choice ended careers permanently. Racks of P90s, Berettas, tactical vests, GDOs, and alongside them the alien additions that marked this armory as different from any other in the U.S. military, ZAT guns in their secured cases, staff weapon components in analysis storage, and several items that had no Earth designation and sat in locked cabinets with color-coded threat assessments on their labels. Carter issued equipment with the practice speed of someone who had done this under time pressure more times than she preferred to count. Austin accepted the tactical vest and examined the P-90 with the assessment of a professional evaluating a tool, weight, balance, action, magazine, before accepting it. Jaime took her vest and weapon with the same economy of motion. Oscar Goldman accepted a vest and then looked at the weapon offered to him with an expression that communicated several decades of being the person who sent other people to do the shooting. "Mr. Goldman," Carter said, "you don't have to." "I'm aware," Goldman said. He took the weapon. "I'm a very good shot, Colonel. I just prefer situations where it doesn't come to that." "That makes two of us," Daniel Jackson said from the equipment rack beside him, checking his sidearm with the slightly resigned expression of a man who had become considerably more comfortable with weapons than his academic background suggested and was not entirely sure how he felt about that. TLC appeared at the armory entrance. "O'Neill. I have identified the Goa'uld most likely operating in that sector based on current intelligence." He paused in the way TLC paused when information required particular attention. "It is Baal." The armory went briefly. The armory went briefly quiet in the specific way that a room goes quiet when a name carries weight that everyone present understands and one person in the room does not. Austin looked at the faces around him. Carter's controlled assessment, Daniel's expression of someone recalibrating tactical expectations, O'Neill's jaw setting in the way that indicated he was filing irritation away for later because there wasn't time for it now, and read the name's significance from the room before anyone explained it. "Baal," he said. "That's a problem." "Baal is always a problem," O'Neill said. He was pulling his vest tabs with the practiced efficiency of a man who had suited up in this room more times than he could accurately count. "He's a Goa'uld System Lord. One of the smarter ones, which is the issue. Most Goa'uld lead with the staff weapons and the theatrical monologuing. Baal leads with information. He knows what he wants before he moves, and he moves when he's confident the outcome is what he planned." He checked his P-90 magazine. The fact that he's operating in that sector with a HOTAC present means he either wants something specific on that planet or he's using the population as leverage for something we don't know about yet. "He clones himself," Carter added, addressing Austin and Jaime with the concise clarity she used for operational briefings. "There have been multiple Baal copies operating simultaneously. The original, if there still is an original, is exceptionally dangerous. He has access to ancient knowledge through means we've had to work hard to counter, and he is not above tactical retreat when a situation stops being favorable. He survived things that killed every other system lord. He also has a genuinely terrible sense of humor," Daniel said. "Which is somehow worse than everything else." O'Neill looked at Austin. "Still want to come?" "More than before," Austin said. He finished securing his vest and checked the P-91 final time. "If he's as smart as you're describing, he'll have contingencies. Multiple exit strategies. You want him to have as many variables as possible that he didn't account for when he made his plan." O'Neill pointed at him. "That's exactly the right answer." He looked at the assembled group, Carter, TLC, Daniel, Austin, Jaime, and Goldman, who had positioned himself at the armory entrance with his weapon and the expression of a man who had decided to commit fully to a situation he had not anticipated being in when he woke up that morning. "Goldman. You're staying here." Goldman opened his mouth. "Non-negotiable," O'Neill said, "without heat but without flexibility either. You're a senior DoD advisor on an inspection tour. I am not taking you through that gate today. You'll be in the control room with full monitoring access. If something goes wrong on our end you'll be the first civilian to know about it and you'll have the ear of General Hammond within 30 seconds. That's not a consolation position, that's a job that matters." Goldman looked at Austin. Austin gave him the minimal nod that communicated trust the direction O'Neill was pointing. Goldman accepted it with the grace of a man who recognized a sound tactical decision even when he was on the receiving end of it. "Full monitoring access," Goldman confirmed. "Sergeant Harriman will set you up in the control room," O'Neill said. He knows more about what happens in this mountain than most of the people who work here. They moved from the armory to the gate room with the ground-eating pace of a team that had done this before, the sound of boots on concrete echoing in the corridor. In the corridor, Austin fell into the formation naturally, finding the position that made sense, behind Carter, to O'Neill's right, with Jaime flanking on the outside. TLC took point approaching the gate room, which was appropriate and which Austin recognized as appropriate, having spent 30 seconds watching the Jaffa move and understanding that this was a man whose combat experience was not measured in the same units as most soldiers he had met. The gate room received them with its customary indifference to the significance of the moment. The Stargate stood in its housing, inert, 9 chevrons waiting. The ramp ran up to the threshold of something that was either the most extraordinary engineering achievement in human history or a reminder that human history was considerably shorter than the history of the gate, depending on how you chose to think about it. Oscar Goldman took his position at the control room window above, standing beside Sergeant Harriman, who had accepted the presence of an unknown DoD advisor in his control room with the professional equanimity of a man who had seen stranger things before breakfast on multiple occasions. Carter moved to the dialing computer. P4X774. Dialing. The chevrons began their sequence. Chevron 1, encoded. Austin stood at the base of the ramp and felt the resonance in his bionic arm begin again. The gate's passive field increasing as the chevrons locked, the Naquata harmonic building through the electronic systems of his arm and registering in the neural interface as the warmth he'd identified earlier, stronger now, more present. Not distracting. If anything, clarifying. He filed it and focused forward. Jaime stood to his left and slightly behind, her bionic ear managing the increasing acoustic intensity of the chevron sequence with the automatic calibration her OSI technicians had built into the system. Each chevron lock produced a concussive sound that would have been uncomfortable at this range for unaugmented hearing. For her it was information. The precise mechanical signature of each chevron engaging, the power cycle of the gate's dialing system, the building frequency of the wormhole establishing itself, all of it layering into a picture of the gate's operational state that was more detailed than anything the control room instruments were measuring. Chevron 4, encoded. "What does it feel like?" she said quietly to Steve, not looking at him. "The arm. What does it feel like right now?" "Like the gate knows the arm is there," he said. "Like it's deciding what to do about it." "My ear is doing something similar," she said. "I can hear the wormhole before it opens. The frequency the gate produces when it's establishing a connection, it's building right now. It sounds like," she searched for the word. "Like something waking up." Chevron 5, encoded. Daniel Jackson appeared at Austin's right shoulder. He had his sidearm, a vest, and the small pack he carried on missions that contained, among other things, translation materials and a first aid kit, because Daniel had learned through hard experience that missions involving alien civilizations frequently required both. "First time through the gate," he said to Austin, not unkindly. "Anything you want to know before it opens? What does it feel like?" Daniel considered this with genuine thoughtfulness. "Cold," he said. "For a fraction of a second, before rematerialization, there's cold. And then you're somewhere else. The disorientation is brief, your brain catches up in about 2 seconds. The ground on the other side might be different from here, so watch your footing on exit." He paused. "Oh, and don't step back into the event horizon once you're through. It's a one-way connection, you'd be trying to rematerialize inside the gate." "That's bad," Austin said. "Extremely," Daniel confirmed. Chevron 6, encoded. O'Neill moved to the front of the ramp. He didn't do a speech. He wasn't a speech person. He looked at his team once, Carter at the dialing computer, TLC immovable at the base of the ramp, Daniel settled and ready, Austin and Jaime in position. And the look contained everything the speech would have said if there had been a speech. "Intel suggests Jaffa ground forces," he said. "Standard patrol patterns, staff weapons. The village is in a valley below the gate's position, will have high ground on arrival. The Hatak is in orbit, which means death gliders are a potential asset for Baal. We move fast, we find our people, we extract. Nobody gets left on that planet. He looked at Austin and Jaime once. Your physical capabilities. Use them. Don't explain them. If Jaffa sees something that confuses them, that's tactical advantage, not a problem. Austin nodded. Jaime nodded. Chevron 7, locked. The Kawush erupted with the force and light of a contained event horizon establishing itself. The unstable vortex blooming outward from the gate center in that fraction of a second before it snapped back into the shimmering pool of the wormhole, blue-white and impossible and entirely real, the sound of it filling the gate room with the reverberant report of physics being asked to do something extraordinary. Austin had flown experimental aircraft at Mach speeds. He had operated in environments that would have been fatal to unaugmented humans. He had been rebuilt from the critical damage of a crash that should have ended him and had instead begun the chapter of his life that everything else had led toward. He had believed, in the way that people who have survived extraordinary things sometimes believe, that he had encountered the limits of what the world could show him. He walked up the ramp. At the event horizon, he paused, 1 second, purely instinctive, the pause of a pilot checking instruments before committing to a maneuver, and then he stepped through. The cold was exactly as described. A fraction of a second of absolute temperature, the sensation of existing in the space between one place and another, and then the rematerialization, a burst of sensory reconnection that was not unpleasant so much as total, every nerve ending confirming its own existence simultaneously, the bionic components of his body cycling through their own reconnection sequence in the same instant. And then he was standing on a hillside under an alien sky. The light was different. Not dramatically. The star this world orbited produced light slightly warmer in color temperature than Earth's sun, giving the hillside grass a golden cast that Earth grass didn't carry. The air was cooler than Colorado had been, carrying the smell of vegetation and something mineral from a river visible in the valley below. The gate stood behind him, the familiar DHD beside it, and before him the hillside dropped away toward a valley where a cluster of structures, stone-built, low, agrarian, were visible perhaps 400 meters down the slope. And above the valley, hanging in the sky with the serene menace of something that had never needed to apologize for its own presence, was the Hatak. A Goa'uld mothership. Massive, pyramidal, its hull catching the alien sun's light along geometries that had nothing to do with Earth engineering. Jaime came through behind him and stopped at his shoulder. She looked at the Hatak for 3 seconds without speaking, her bionic ear extending its range into the valley below, cataloging sounds, Jaffa voices, staff weapon mechanical signatures. The sounds of a population under guard. 400 meters, she said quietly. At least 20 Jaffa in the village perimeter. I can hear staff weapons charging. They're on active patrol, not rest. O'Neill appeared beside them. He looked at the Hatak with the expression he reserved for things he had dealt with before and was not happy to be dealing with again. 20 Jaffa, he said. That I can identify from here, Jaime said. There may be more inside the structures. O'Neill looked at Austin. Still manageable. Austin looked at the valley, the village, the Hatak hanging above it all, and ran the calculation with the calm of a man who had spent his career being the variable that made unmanageable situations manageable. Let's go get your people, he said. The hillside descent took 4 minutes at a pace that balanced speed against noise discipline, the team moving through the golden grass slope in a staggered formation that TLC set and the others matched without instruction. Austin tracked the terrain with his bionic eye. Infrared overlay mapping heat signatures in the valley below, the warm clusters of Jaffa patrol positions resolving into individual figures at 300 meters, their staff weapons producing distinctive thermal signatures that his eye cataloged and filed automatically. He counted 23 in the outer perimeter. Jaime's acoustic assessment had been conservative. He relayed the count to O'Neill with a hand signal. O'Neill absorbed it without breaking stride. The village's outer structures provided cover at the base of the hill, stone walls, low-roofed buildings, the layout of a settlement that had existed for generations without expecting to become a tactical problem. The population was consolidated in what appeared to be a central gathering space, visible through the gaps between buildings as Austin moved up to the wall and pressed against the stone. Perhaps 300 people, seated, Jaffa standing at intervals around the perimeter with the particular alertness of soldiers who were confident in their position but not complacent. TLC appeared at Austin's shoulder and studied the scene with the focused attention of a man who had commanded Jaffa forces and therefore understood precisely what he was looking at. "The patrol pattern is standard HOTAC ground deployment," he said, his voice a controlled murmur that carried no further than intended. "Baal's Jaffa. I recognize the armor configuration. The vertical stripe on the shoulder plate indicates his personal guard, not standard garrison troops." He paused. "He considers this acquisition significant enough to send his best." "Where are our people?" O'Neill said. TLC indicated a building on the far side of the central square. Larger than the others, stone-built, what appeared to be the village's primary communal structure. "The prisoners will be held separately from the population. That building has 2 Jaffa at the entrance and the patrol density around it is higher than the surrounding structures." "Of course it is," O'Neill said. Carter was running calculations behind her eyes. Austin had learned to recognize that expression in the 40 minutes he had known her. "If we move on the holding building directly, the perimeter Jaffa will converge in under 60 seconds. We need a distraction that draws the outer patrol away from the square before we move." "I can move faster than your team," Austin said. It was not a boast. It was a tactical statement, offered in the same register as Carter's calculation. "If I circle the village perimeter on the east side, I can cover ground fast enough to draw patrol attention without triggering a full alert." "It gives you a window." "How fast?" O'Neill said. 60 miles per hour sustained. Faster in short bursts. O'Neill looked at him for 1 second. "On foot." "On foot." "A beat." "Okay, that's going to take a minute to fully process, but tactically it's useful, so we'll process later." He looked at Carter. "Thoughts?" "If he moves at that speed along the eastern wall, the Jaffa on that side will react to the motion. Staff weapon range is effective to about 300 meters but accuracy drops significantly beyond 150. If he stays at distance and keeps moving, he draws 3 to 5 patrol units east while we approach from the west." Carter looked at Austin. "The risk is that Baal's guard are not standard Jaffa. They'll adapt faster than garrison troops." "Then I'll keep moving," Austin said. "I'll go with him," Jaime said. O'Neill looked at her. "2 moving targets are harder to track than 1, she said. "And I can hear where their fire is going before it arrives. I can keep us both clear." O'Neill ran the calculation. It was fast. The calculation of a commander who had learned to make decisions at the speed situations required rather than the speed he would have preferred. "All right. Austin, Sommers, eastern perimeter, draw the patrol. 60 seconds, then fall back north and hold. Don't engage unless you have no choice. Carter, Daniel, you're with me on the west approach to the holding building. TLC. I will address the guards at the entrance, TLC said, in the tone that indicated this was not a suggestion but a statement of what was going to happen. Try not to enjoy it, O'Neill said. I will endeavor to maintain appropriate solemnity, TLC said. Austin and Jaime separated from the group at the wall's corner, moving east along the village's outer edge. The stone wall gave way to open ground and Austin shifted his pace. Not to full speed, not yet, but to the controlled acceleration that preceded it, the bionic legs engaging their full mechanical capability in a way that felt to him as natural as walking but covered ground at a rate that would have been startling to anyone watching. Jaime matched him, her own bionic legs producing the same fluid, ground-eating pace, and for a moment, a brief, strange, clarifying moment. Steve Austin ran alongside the one person in the world who understood what it felt like to move this way, who had lived in the same altered relationship with physics that he had, who carried the same legacy of government reconstruction and field deployment and the complicated ongoing negotiation with being something more than standard human and something different from what you'd been before. No one else ran like this. No one else had ever run like this beside him except her. It wasn't the time to think about it. He filed it. The first Jaffa spotted them at 200 meters, exactly as planned. The shout in Goa'uld dialect, Cree, carried across the open ground and was answered by two others, and then the Eastern Patrol was moving, staff weapons coming up, the distinctive charging whine of a staff weapon cycling to fire audible even to unaugmented hearing. 3 on our left, 2 coming from the northeast, Jaime said, her voice steady as a metronome. The 2 from the northeast are faster, they're going to try to cut us off at the wall corner. They won't make it, Austin said. He accelerated. 60 miles per hour on open ground was a different order of experience from running at human speed. The terrain resolution at his bionic eye's full extension allowed him to read the ground surface 20 meters ahead continuously, compensating his stride for the slight irregularities in the terrain that would have tripped an unaugmented runner at this pace. The Jaffa ahead of them were fast. Jaffa biology, enhanced by the symbiote they carried, produced soldiers considerably more physically capable than baseline humans, but they were not fast at this scale. The 2 attempting the intercept from the northeast were still 40 meters short of the wall corner when Austin and Jaime passed it. Staff weapon fire opened behind them. The distinctive orange-red energy blasts of Goa'uld staff weapons cutting through the morning air, each shot carrying the concussive crack of displaced atmosphere. At the range the Jaffa were firing from and at the speed Austin and Jaime were moving, accuracy was poor but not non-existent. One blast struck the ground 6 feet to Austin's right and threw soil and stone fragments in an arc that his bionic eye tracked and his body compensated for without breaking stride. 5 following, 2 have stopped to communicate, Jaime said. They're reporting in. Someone in the village is going to know we're out here in about 30 seconds. Then we have 30 seconds, Austin said. On the western side of the village, O'Neill's team was moving. TLC approached the holding building's entrance with the bearing of a man who had spent decades projecting absolute authority to Jaffa soldiers and had not lost the capability simply because he was now on the other side of it. He wore SGC tactical gear, not Jaffa armor, which was the variable. The 2 guards at the entrance registered the approach of a Jaffa, the bearing, the stride, the way he carried himself. Before they registered the gear, and in those 2 seconds of cognitive hesitation TLC closed the distance to a range where the outcome was not in question. 2 strikes, precise and overwhelming, the guards down before the confusion resolved into response. O'Neill, Carter, and Daniel came through the entrance behind him. The interior of the holding building was low-ceilinged and stone-floored, lit by the daylight coming through narrow window openings and a single Goa'uld light device that someone had placed in the corner, a concession to visibility that also marked the building as recently occupied by Goa'uld forces rather than just Jaffa. 3 figures were secured against the far wall with Jaffa restraints, energy binders, wrist-mounted, the dull ache of low-level current that discouraged movement without causing damage. Captain Reeves looked up as O'Neill entered. His expression traveled from resignation to relief to the professional recalibration of a field officer who was going to feel all of this more fully when the immediate situation had resolved. "Sir." "Captain," O'Neill said. "How many times have I told teams to never go off mission without a check-in, sir? This was not my finest hour. We'll have that conversation later." O'Neill crouched beside the restraints while Carter pulled a Takare-derived energy binder disruptor from her vest. "Anyone hurt?" "Bruised," Reeves said. "They wanted us functional for questioning. A Goa'uld, we think it was Baal himself, came to the holding building twice. Asked about the SGC. About what we knew regarding ancient technology in this sector." He paused. "Sir, he knew about the gate program. Not everything, but enough. He knew about Earth's address. He knew about our alliance with the Takare. Carter looked at O'Neill as the restraints released with a soft discharge. He's been running an intelligence operation, not just a population acquisition. The population is leverage, O'Neill said. He wanted us to come after our people. We should have expected that, Reeves said. Yes, O'Neill said, without argument. We should have. He helped Reeves to his feet. Can you run? Absolutely. Good. Because we are about to. The building's entrance darkened. Not because someone was blocking it. Because the daylight outside had changed. The warm alien sun's light had shifted to something harder, colder, the distinctive blue-white of Goa'uld transport rings cycling to active status, a shimmer in the air above the village center that indicated a ring platform had been activated somewhere in the structure above and was preparing to receive or deliver. From the Hatak in orbit. Carter said what they were all calculating. He was here. In the village. We didn't account for Baal already being on the ground. Outside, the sound of staff weapons fire from the east had stopped. Austin's voice came through the radio on O'Neill's vest, clear, controlled, carrying the specific quality of someone transmitting information they knew would complicate things. O'Neill. We have a situation. The patrol we drew pulled back on a command signal. They're not pursuing. They're repositioning toward the village center. Because Baal just activated the ring platform, O'Neill said. A pause on the radio. How bad is Baal? Austin said. O'Neill looked at the ceiling, which was a habit he had developed as a substitute for more demonstrative responses to difficult information. Remember when I said he leads with information and moves when he's confident the outcome is what he planned? Yes. He just moved. The ring platform cycle completed with the resonant harmonic of Goa'uld transportation technology fully engaged, and in the village center 30 meters away, the rings descended from above in their characteristic sequence, delivering to the stone ground of an alien world a figure in Goa'uld armor who moved with the absolute, performed confidence of someone who had arranged the situation they were currently standing in. Baal looked at the village around him with the expression of a man surveying something he already owned. Then he looked toward the holding building, directly, as though he could see through the stone wall to the people inside it, and smiled. The smile was the worst part. Not because it indicated pleasure, Goa'uld expressions of pleasure were generally preferable to their expressions of displeasure, tactically speaking, but because it indicated certainty. Baal smiled the way a chess player smiles when the opponent has finally made the move that completes the configuration the chess player arranged 3 turns ago. It was the smile of a man who had already run this scenario and knew which version he was in. O'Neill knew that smile. He had been on the receiving end of it before, in circumstances he did not enjoy revisiting, and its appearance now told him several things simultaneously. Baal had not been surprised by the rescue attempt. Baal had expected it. The population consolidation, the held SGC personnel, the patrol deployment that drew Austin and Jaime east and then stopped pursuing, all of it had been architecture, not improvisation. They had walked into a situation that had been designed to receive them. Carter, O'Neill said quietly. Working on it, Carter said, which meant she was already 3 steps ahead of the question he hadn't finished asking. The village center was visible through the holding building's narrow window openings, Carter at one, O'Neill at another, the freed SG-9 personnel pressed against the wall below the window line. Baal stood in the center of the square with 6 of his personal guard forming a loose perimeter around him, staff weapons at the carry rather than aimed, which was the body language of soldiers who were not expecting to need them immediately. That was either confidence or a performance of confidence, and with Baal the distinction was never simple to establish. The village population remained seated in their consolidated group. They were watching Baal with the specific stillness of people who had learned that stillness was the safest response available to them. Which told O'Neill something about how Baal's forces had conducted themselves during the occupation. It was the stillness of people who had already seen what happened when someone moved without permission. Austin's voice came through the radio again, lower than before, closer. We've repositioned to the north side of the holding building. Jaime has a full acoustic picture of the square. Give us a read on what you need. Stand by, O'Neill said. He's going to speak, TLC said from beside O'Neill's window. He has positioned himself for an address. This is theater. Everything Baal does is theater, O'Neill said. The question is what the theater is covering. As if in response to the observation, Baal's voice filled the village square with the resonant double timbre of a Goa'uld host. The symbiote's frequencies layered beneath the host's vocal range, producing the sound that millennia of deliberate engineering had made instinctively unsettling to human neurology. It was not a sound that required translation to communicate authority. The population of the village responded to it with visible physical contraction, shoulders drawing in, heads lowering. Daniel, at the third window, listened with his full attention. His expression moved through recognition. The linguistic assessment running automatically, the archaeologist's ear sorting the Goa'uld dialects register and formality level. He's addressing the SGC team, Daniel said quietly. He knows we're in the building. He's saying, he paused, tracking. He's saying he anticipated our arrival and is pleased we chose to attend. He's inviting General O'Neill to come out and continue a conversation they apparently began on a previous occasion. A beat. He says he has a proposal. Of course he does, O'Neill said. He also says, Daniel's expression shifted slightly. He says he's aware there are individuals with us who are unfamiliar to him. He says their biometric signatures were detected by his HOTAC sensors when they came through the gate and that their readings are, his word is fascinating. He says he finds them fascinating and would like to examine them personally. The holding building was quiet for 3 seconds. He scanned Austin and Jaime from orbit, Carter said. From orbit, O'Neill confirmed. His HOTAC sensors would read their bionic components as a hybrid of organic and electronic technology. To Goa'uld sensor analysis that would appear like a failed attempt at Goa'uld enhancement, TLC said. Or like something more interesting. Baal would not be able to determine which from sensor data alone. He would want to examine them physically. He paused. He would want them as hosts. Or as subjects. O'Neill pressed the radio. Austin. You heard that? I heard it, Austin said. A pause. He scanned us from orbit. His sensors read your bionics as something he hasn't encountered before. He wants to take a closer look. Another pause, shorter. That's not happening. Agreed. Here's where we are, he's got the square, he's got the high ground in terms of personnel and he's got a HOTAC overhead which means death gliders on call. Our advantages are speed, which is U2, Carter's brain, TLC's combat capability, and the fact that Baal likes to talk before he acts. O'Neill glanced at the window. He's still talking. He's explaining the terms of his proposal, Daniel said, tracking. He wants the SGC team to surrender the 2 individuals his sensors identified. In exchange he'll release the village population and allow SG-9 and SG-1 to return through the gate. Daniel's voice carried the tone he used for things he found morally unacceptable but was reporting accurately because accurate reporting was the job. He says he gives his word as a system lord. His word as a system lord, O'Neill repeated. He's aware of how that sounds, Daniel said. He's framing it as a more reliable guarantee than his alternatives, which he describes as significantly less pleasant for everyone involved. O'Neill looked at the assembled people in the holding building. Reeves and his 2 team members, freed and functional. Carter with her tactical mind already visibly running contingencies. TLC, immovable as stone. Daniel, who had been in worse spots than this and had the track record to prove it. And through the radio, 2 people who had walked through an alien gate for the first time 40 minutes ago and were now being offered as bargaining chips by a Goa'uld System Lord who had arranged the entire situation to produce exactly this moment. Austin, O'Neill said. Sir. The "sir" was deliberate. Austin was a 4-star general and O'Neill was a 2-star, but they were on O'Neill's operation and Austin had accepted that structure in the armory and was honoring it now in the way that genuine military professionals honored the chain of command even when the rank differential ran the other way. O'Neill registered it and filed it as data about the kind of man Austin was. "I need to know your tactical assessment," O'Neill said. "Specifically what you and Sommers can do in the next 60 seconds if I create an opening." A pause on the radio that was not hesitation, it was calculation. Then Austin's voice, quiet and precise. "Jaime has full acoustic positioning on all 23 Jaffa in the perimeter. She can call every staff weapon discharge before it fires. The charging cycle is audible to her ear with enough lead time to move clear. My speed puts me at any point in the square in under 2 seconds from our current position. At close range I can take a staff weapon discharge without incapacitation. The bionic arm and legs are shielded against electrical discharge to a degree that a single hit won't stop me. A beat. I can't guarantee a second hit. And the death gliders overhead are a variable I can't address from the ground." "The death gliders are mine," Carter said. She had her tablet out and was working with the focused intensity of someone who had found the thread she needed. "Webb, when you came through the gate, did you see where Baal's forces stored their equipment outside the village perimeter?" Webb, pressed against the wall, nodded. "Northern edge of the village. A Teltac, cargo ship. Landed in the field about 200 meters north. A Teltac has a staff cannon on its dorsal mount," Carter said. "Sufficient to discourage death gliders from a strafing run if I can get to it and get it operational." "You can fly a Teltac," Reeves said. "I've flown worse," Carter said, which was entirely true. O'Neill ran the complete picture. Carter to the Teltac, 200 meters north, covering air. TLC and Daniel through the building's rear exit approaching the square from the south. Austin and Jaime as the primary contact variable in the square itself. Webb and the freed SG-9 personnel moving the village population toward the gate under the cover of the engagement. It was not a clean plan. Clean plans did not generally survive contact with Baal. But it was a plan with multiple simultaneous pressure points, which was the correct architecture against an opponent who had designed for a single predictable response. "Baal's still talking," Daniel said from the window. "He's beginning to run out of proposal content. He'll want an answer soon." "Give me 30 seconds, O'Neill said. He pressed the radio. "Austin, on my signal you and Jaime enter the square from the north side. Don't engage. I need Baal looking at you, not at Carter's direction. Can you give me a 30-second window?" "Easily," Austin said. "Carter, north exit, move now. TLC, Daniel, south exit, 30-second delay. Webb, get your people ready to move the civilians the moment the square opens up." Carter was already at the building's north wall, where a low doorway opened onto the village's outer perimeter path. She moved through it with her P-90 up and her mind already at the Teltac. O'Neill moved to the holding building's main entrance. He straightened his vest, checked his P-90, and assumed the expression he wore when he was about to walk into something difficult while appearing to walk into something routine. "Signal," he said into the radio. He opened the door and walked into the village square. Baal turned to face him with the theatrical precision of a man who had been waiting for exactly this entrance. The 6 personal guard shifted stance. Not aggressive, but present, the physical punctuation of a sentence that hadn't been finished yet. "General O'Neill," Baal said in accented English, with the particular satisfaction of someone greeting a guest they arranged the invitations for. "You look well. Better than our last meeting." "You look exactly the same," O'Neill said. "Which one are you?" 3. 4. Baal's expression acknowledged the provocation without conceding to it. "I have a proposal." "I heard," O'Neill said. "And here's my counter." From the north side of the square, Steve Austin and Jaime Sommers walked into Baal's line of sight. Baal looked at them the way he looked at things that genuinely interested him, with the focused, acquisitive attention of a being who had lived for millennia and had learned that genuine surprises were rare and therefore valuable. His eyes moved from Austin to Jaime and back, and in that moment of redirected attention, Carter cleared the village's northern perimeter at a dead sprint toward the field where the Teltac sat. "Fascinating," Baal said, and for once the word was entirely sincere. "Yeah," Austin said. "People keep saying that." He met Baal's eyes with the direct steadiness of a man who had looked at things that called themselves gods before and had not found the experience as intimidating as advertised. "I'm told you wanted to examine us personally." "I did," Baal said. He took 2 steps forward, studying Austin with the clinical interest of a scientist approaching a specimen. "Your biometric readings confounded my sensors." "Organic, yes, but integrated with electronic components at a level of complexity that suggests either remarkable human ingenuity or access to technology you should not possess." He tilted his head. "Which is it?" "Human ingenuity," Austin said. "Remarkable," Baal said, and whether he meant the ingenuity or the answer wasn't clear. He shifted his gaze to Jaime. "And you?" "Your auditory capability, my sensors registered it as an anomaly. You heard things on this planet that no human should have been able to hear." "I heard you planning this," Jaime said. It was not entirely true, she had heard the patrol repositioning, but it was close enough to the shape of the truth to land the way she intended it to land. Baal studied her for a moment. Then he smiled again, and this time the smile was different, the smile of someone who has encountered a variable that makes the game more interesting rather than less. "I think," he said, "that my proposal requires revision." From 200 meters north, the Teltac's dorsal staff cannon cycled to active with the distinctive power-up sound of Goa'uld energy weapons engaging at scale. Baal heard it. His smile didn't disappear, but it changed register, from certainty to recalculation, the chess player recognizing that the board had been rearranged while he was focused on the wrong pieces. He looked up, not at the Teltac, but at his Hotak hanging in the sky, the death gliders that were his reliable final option, and found them covered. "Colonel Carter," he said, without needing to be told. "Of course." "She's thorough," O'Neill said. The personal guard looked to Baal for the signal that would tell them which version of this situation they were in. Baal did not give it immediately, which was itself information. He was still calculating, running contingencies, looking for the move that restored his preferred configuration. TLC and Daniel had emerged from the south side of the square. Webb and the freed SG-9 members were moving the village population quietly toward the northern perimeter. The square was becoming, moment by moment, a situation that Baal had designed for a specific outcome and which was now producing a different one. O'Neill kept his voice level. "Here's how this ends, Baal. Your Jaffa stand down. You let these people go, all of them. You go back to your Hotak and you leave this system." He paused. "Or Carter puts a staff cannon round across your bow and we have a much less civilized version of this conversation." Baal looked at Austin and Jaime one more time. The acquisitive interest was still there, it hadn't been tactical performance, it had been genuine, but it was being managed now, filed under future considerations by a mind that was very good at distinguishing between battles and wars. "You have made an error today, General," Baal said, and his tone was not angry. It was informational. These 2 individuals, whatever they are, represent something I have not encountered before. I am patient. I have been patient for a very long time. His eyes moved to Austin. "We will speak again." "I'll look forward to it," Austin said, in a tone that indicated he would not. Baal raised one hand. The personal guard stood down. The ring platform in the village center activated, the rings descending and lifting Baal from the stone ground of P4X-774 with the smooth indifference of technology that had been performing this function for millennia. Carrying him back to his Hotak with the unhurried dignity of a man who was choosing to leave rather than being forced to. The Hotak held its position in orbit for exactly 4 minutes. Then it moved, not away, not yet, but to a higher orbital position, the tactical withdrawal of a force that was not defeated but had chosen to defer. O'Neill pressed his radio. Carter. I have eyes on the Hatak, sir. It's moving to high orbit. Not jumping to hyperspace yet. Keep the cannon hot until it does. Yes, sir. O'Neill looked at the village square. The Jaffa standing down around the perimeter, the population beginning to move under Webb's direction, TLC watching the Jaffa with the attention of a man who trusted a stand-down order only as far as he could verify it. Daniel already moving toward the village population with the instinct of a man who understood that 300 people who had just been under Goa'uld guard needed a human presence more than they needed tactical assessment. Austin was standing in the center of the square where Baal had been 30 seconds earlier. He was looking up at the position in the sky where the Hatak hung, visible as a dark shape against the alien atmosphere. Jaime appeared beside him. He meant it, she said. When he said we'd speak again. I know, Austin said. His voice, when he said it. No performance in it. That was the first thing he said today that he actually meant. I know that too, Austin said. He looked at her. How's your ear? Overworked, she said. But functional. She looked at the Hatak. Steve. What he said about our biometric readings confounding his sensors. What does that mean for us? Going forward? If Baal knows we exist. It means, O'Neill said, appearing beside them, that you're now on a System Lord's radar, which is not a position anyone asks for but which you've both handled better than most people who end up there. He looked at Austin directly. You gave me a 30-second window and you held Baal's attention for 4 minutes. That's why Carter had time to reach the Teltac. That's why 300 people are walking toward the gate right now instead of being loaded into transport rings. He paused. Good work. Austin accepted this with the minimal nod of a professional receiving an accurate assessment. From high orbit, the Hatak's hyperspace window opened with the characteristic visual distortion of a ship translating out of normal space, a ripple in the sky, a brief brilliance, and then nothing. The ship was gone. The alien sun continued its indifferent progression across the sky of P4X 774. The village square was filling with the sounds of a population beginning to understand that the immediate threat had passed, the particular human noise of people checking on each other, the sounds of relief finding its first tentative expressions. O'Neill pressed his radio. Carter, Hatak has jumped. Confirmed, sir. I'm reading clear skies. Do you want me to hold position? Bring the Teltac back to the village. We're going to need the rings to move the population to the gate area efficiently. Then we're all going home. He clicked off the radio and looked at Austin and Jaime. Let's get everyone through the gate. The gate address for P4X 774 locked from the DHD with the practiced efficiency of TLC's hand moving across the crystal interface, 7 symbols, the point of origin last, the sequence producing the familiar chevron lock sequence that Austin now recognized not just as mechanical sound but as the specific acoustic architecture of interstellar travel being initiated. The kawoosh erupted and settled into the event horizon shimmer, and the business of moving 300 people through a Stargate began. It was not a fast process. SGC procedure for mass civilian gate transit had been developed through hard experience on multiple worlds and multiple crisis situations, and it reflected the accumulated lessons of those experiences in its organized patience. TLC and Daniel managed the population flow at the gate itself, maintaining the disciplined stream of people through the event horizon in groups that kept the 38-minute connection window from becoming a problem. The village's population moved with the stunned compliance of people who had been through enough in the preceding hours that one more extraordinary thing, a ring of alien stone that opened a door to another world. Registered as simply the next event in a sequence of events they had stopped trying to fully process. Austin worked the perimeter. He had taken the eastern position without being assigned it, reading the tactical landscape and moving to where the gap was, which was the instinct of a field operative who assessed situations rather than waiting to be placed in them. The Jaffa who had stood down at Baal's command were still present on the village's outer edges. 23 soldiers with staff weapons at the carry, standing in the loose formation of a force that had received an order to cease hostilities and was honoring it with the professional discipline of Baal's personal guard. Which was better discipline than most Jaffa forces Austin had read about in the briefing Carter had provided on the walk down from the hill. He kept distance and kept moving, his bionic eye tracking each Jaffa's weapon status at 200 meters, the staff weapons charging coils visible in infrared as cold at rest, the distinctive heat signature that preceded a discharge. All cold. All at rest. The stand down was genuine, not performance. But Baal had left his Jaffa here. The Jaffa on the eastern perimeter are standing down correctly, but they haven't been recalled to a pickup point. They're holding position. O'Neill's response came back immediately. I see it. Carter, what's the HOTAC's last known vector? Carter's voice from somewhere in the village, where she had returned the Teltac and was now coordinating civilian transport with Webb. High orbit departure, sir. Vector was consistent with a withdrawal to the outer system but not a hyperspace jump to another star system. The energy signature was too brief for an interstellar translation. A pause on the radio that had weight. He went to the outer system, O'Neill said. He didn't leave. He's waiting, Carter said. Austin understood the architecture immediately. Baal had withdrawn from the planet because the staff cannon on the Teltac made the air engagement unfavorable. But a Teltac was not a warship. In open space, with the HOTAC between them and Earth's gate address, a Teltac was not a meaningful obstacle. Baal was patient. Baal led with information. Baal had been told today, by the biometric readings his sensors took, by the performance Austin and Jaime gave in the square, by Carter's move to the Teltac that demonstrated how SGC operatives used available resources, exactly what this team could do. He was recalculating in the outer system. And when the recalculation was complete, he would move again. How many people left to transit? Austin said. O'Neill checked with Daniel at the gate. Approximately 90. Maybe 15 minutes. Then we have 15 minutes before the civilian transit is complete and we lose the reason he's being patient. Austin kept moving along the eastern perimeter, his bionic eye tracking Jaffa positions. Once the last civilian goes through, his leverage over this situation changes. He can engage without being responsible for civilian casualties. And will be on the wrong side of the gate. Which is exactly what he planned from the moment he went to the outer system, Carter said. O'Neill was quiet for 3 seconds. Austin had learned in the course of the morning that O'Neill's silences had distinct characters. The silence of a man performing patience was different from the silence of a man running genuine calculations, and this was the second kind. When O'Neill spoke, his voice had the quality of someone who had reached a decision and was moving directly to its execution. Carter, can the Teltac make orbit? Yes, sir. It's not a warship but it has a hyperdrive. Not as powerful as the HOTAC but capable of short jumps. Can you jump it between us and the HOTAC's position if he makes a move? I can get it into position. Whether it deters him is a different question. It doesn't need to deter him. It needs to occupy his attention long enough for us to get everyone through the gate. O'Neill's voice moved from the radio to the square as he appeared at the gate's position, addressing the remaining civilians with the direct calm that Austin had identified as one of O'Neill's most effective operational qualities. The ability to make people in difficult situations feel that the person in charge had a plan, which was frequently true and occasionally more complicated than that. Daniel. How fast can we move this? Daniel, managing the gate flow, looked at the remaining crowd with the assessment of a linguist and anthropologist who understood how human groups moved under stress. If we explain the urgency. Explain the urgency, O'Neill said. Daniel turned to the remaining villagers and began speaking, not in English, but in the Goa'uld trade dialect that most human populations in the gate network had been exposed to through centuries of Goa'uld occupation. His voice was calm and direct and carried the specific authority of someone who meant what they were saying rather than performing meaning. The crowd responded. Not with panic, but with the organized urgency of people who understood that the situation had parameters and were being trusted with that information. The transit rate increased. Jaime was at the DHD, not touching it, but positioned where she could hear everything in a 300-meter radius. She had been running her ear at full extension since the Eastern Perimeter conversation, tracking the Jaffa positions, tracking the sounds of the gate transit, tracking the broader acoustic landscape of the planet for the thing that would change before it was visible. The alien world had its own soundscape, wind in the golden grass of the hillside, the river in the valley below, the sounds of a population moving through a gate. And underneath it, the constant background of systems and signals that her ears sorted continuously. She heard the Hatak before anyone else knew it had moved. The specific sound of a Goa'uld mothership sublight drive engaging at orbital distance was not a sound human ears were designed to detect. It was a low-frequency electromagnetic pulse produced by the ship's propulsion system, transmitted through the planet's ionosphere and arriving at the surface as a vibration in the upper frequency range of Jaime's bionic ear, barely detectable, brief, but distinct. She had never heard it before and she identified it correctly anyway because it matched nothing else in the planetary acoustic environment and because it came from above. "He's moving," she said. At the same moment the gate room's tactical radio crackled with Carter's voice from the teltac. "Sir, I'm reading Hatak sublight drive activation. He's coming back down to low orbit. I estimate 3 minutes to weapons range." "How many people left?" O'Neill said. 40, Daniel said. "Get them through." O'Neill looked at Austin. "Options." "Carter takes the teltac to orbit," Austin said immediately. "Not to engage, to force him to deal with a variable in his approach. He won't destroy a teltac that might be carrying his Jaffa, so it buys time. Meanwhile TLC handles the ground Jaffa. They're going to receive a command signal when the Hatak reaches weapons range and they'll reactivate. He needs to be ready for that." Austin looked at the gate. "The 30 people who just went through that gate are on the other side with no way back once we close the wormhole. We need everyone through before he's in weapons range or we close it and protect the people we have." O'Neill looked at him for 1 second. The look of a commanding officer assessing whether the person in front of him had just said the right thing. "Carter, go. Get the teltac to low orbit, make him manage you as a variable. Do not engage his weapons." "Yes, sir." The teltac's drive activated in the field north of the village, the cargo ship lifting with the smooth capability of Goa'uld engineering, rising through the alien atmosphere with the unhurried competence of technology that had been performing this function for thousands of years. TLC moved to the eastern edge of the gate area and positioned himself in the sight lines of the Jaffa perimeter, staff weapon in hand, his bearing carrying the absolute message that he was prepared for whatever signal came. The Jaffa watched him. A first prime recognizing another, the professional assessment of soldiers who understood they were looking at someone who had been doing this longer than most of them had been carrying a symbiote. 20 left, Daniel said. The Hatak's descent was visible now, the dark pyramidal shape resolving against the alien sky, sublight drive glowing at its base, dropping from high orbit to weapons range with the deliberate pace of a ship whose commander had made his decision and was executing it without urgency because urgency would have implied doubt. The Jaffa on the eastern perimeter received their signal. Austin saw it in infrared before it was visible to the eye. The staff weapon charging coils cycling from cold to active across 23 weapons simultaneously, the heat signatures blooming in his bionic eyes display as the Jaffa snapped from stand-down to combat ready in the single organized motion of a well-trained force receiving a command they had been waiting for. "TLC," Austin said. "Indeed," TLC said, and moved. What followed in the next 90 seconds was the kind of engagement that Austin had never witnessed at first hand and would spend a considerable amount of time processing afterward. TLC fighting Jaffa was not the same as watching any other combat Austin had been part of or observed. It was the combat of a man who had trained in this form for over a century, who understood Jaffa tactics at the level of someone who had designed and implemented them, who moved through a staff weapon engagement with the prescient efficiency of a fighter who always knew where the next shot was coming from because he had ordered shots like it himself for 100 years. Austin moved on the western flank, his bionic legs covering ground at a rate that pulled Jaffa attention and staff weapon fire toward him and away from the gate area where Daniel was moving the last of the civilians through in a controlled stream that had not broken into panic despite the combat erupting 40 meters away. His bionic arm caught one staff weapon discharge that would have hit him in the chest. The blast impacting the arm's shielding and transferring its energy into the mechanical structure with enough force to push him sideways but not enough to stop him, and he closed the distance to the firing Jaffa in 2 seconds and addressed the situation with the direct application of an arm capable of bending steel. The Jaffa went down. Jaime was working the northern perimeter, moving at the speed her bionic legs allowed, her ear calling staff weapon discharges 3 seconds before they fired, the charging cycle audible to her as clearly as a spoken warning, and moving herself and the civilians nearest her out of the discharge paths with the specific grace of someone who had learned to treat her bionic capabilities not as a replacement for human judgment but as an addition to it. She was not fighting the Jaffa. She was preventing the Jaffa from hitting the things that mattered. 10 people left, Daniel said, his voice carrying the controlled urgency of a man who had learned to function normally in situations that were entirely abnormal. Above them, the Teltac had reached low orbit and Carter had positioned it between the Hotak and the planet's surface with the accuracy of a pilot who had learned orbital mechanics from Asgard databases and understood exactly what geometry would force the Hotak to manage her as a variable before engaging the surface. The Hotak slowed. Not stopped. Baal was not a commander who stopped, but slowed, the tactical pause of a mind recalculating. 3 seconds. Carter had bought them 3 seconds. 5, Daniel said. TLC had reduced the Eastern Jaffa engagement to 4 standing opponents and was addressing them with the methodical efficiency of someone finishing a task. Austin was back at the gate perimeter, his bionic eye scanning for remaining threats, finding none that were immediate. 2, Daniel said. The last 2 villagers were an elderly man and a woman supporting him, moving at the pace that age and the morning's events had reduced them to. Daniel was with them, one hand at the old man's elbow, guiding rather than rushing, because Daniel Jackson had learned a long time ago that the measure of what they were doing out here was not the speed of the extraction but whether everyone came through it with their dignity intact. They stepped through the gate. Daniel looked at O'Neill. O'Neill looked at the gate, the empty square, the remaining Jaffa that TLC had contained, the Hotak in the sky above them that was beginning to move again now that Carter no longer had the geometry advantage. Everyone through, he said into the radio. Carter, disengage and go to hyperspace, shortest jump back to Earth orbit. We'll coordinate pickup with the Prometheus. Yes sir. Good luck. TLC, Austin, Sommers, gate. Now. TLC came through the engagement's final moments and moved to the gate with the unhurried stride of a man who had earned the right to never appear to be running from anything. Jaime reached the ramp and went through without breaking stride, the event horizon accepting her with the same indifferent efficiency it offered everyone. Austin was last. He stood at the base of the ramp for 1 second, not hesitation, just the instinct to confirm the area behind him was clear. And looked up at the Hotak descending toward weapons range, at the alien sky of P4X-774, at the village in the valley below where 300 people would wake up tomorrow without Jaffa guards and with a story they would spend the rest of their lives telling. He stepped through the gate. The cold came and went in the fraction of a second that it always would, and then he was standing in the gate room at Cheyenne Mountain, the iris sealing behind him with the mechanical certainty of a barrier that had been specifically designed to ensure that nothing came through after the team. O'Neill was already on the radio to the control room. Close the iris. Dial P4X-774 in 30 minutes, I want to know if anyone's home. He looked around the gate room. Medical for anyone who needs it. Debrief in 1 hour. The gate room's organized energy began its post-mission cycle, personnel accounting for each other, medical moving to the returnees, the technicians above logging the mission closure. The 300 civilians from P4X-774 were in the auxiliary briefing areas, having emerged into a mountain in Colorado with considerably less distress than might have been expected, which was a credit to Daniel's transit management and to the human capacity for adaptation when the alternative was considerably worse. Austin stood beside Jaime in the gate room, both of them in the particular state that follows high-intensity operations. Not adrenaline crash exactly, but the calibration that the body performs when it is confirming that the immediate danger has resolved and assessing what comes next. His bionic arm was running a self-diagnostic that he could feel as a faint internal rhythm, the system checking itself after the staff weapon impact, confirming structural integrity, returning a nominal result. Oscar Goldman appeared at the gate room entrance. He had his jacket on and his glasses straight and the expression of a man who had watched the entire operation on the control room monitors and had several hundred questions in an order he had already determined. He looked at Austin and Jaime, confirmed they were functional, and allowed himself one visible exhalation of relief before recomposing. The staff weapon hit, Goldman said to Austin. The arm handled it, Austin said. I saw. The control room monitors tracked the impact. Carter's people are already asking questions about the shielding properties. Goldman looked at him steadily. Baal knows you exist. He does. Which means this isn't over. No, Austin said. It isn't. Goldman was quiet for a moment, looking at the gate, which had closed behind its iris and was now simply a ring of alien stone in a mountain in Colorado, as it had been for years before they arrived, as it would be tomorrow when they were gone. Except they were not going to be gone in any way that mattered, and Goldman was already understanding that, running the implications with the mind of a man who had spent his career understanding implications. I'll need to make some calls, he said. You'll need a very high clearance line, O'Neill said, appearing beside them with his P90 at his side and his vest still on and the expression of a man who had just run an operation that went approximately as well as operations involving Baal ever went, which was to say it had resolved without catastrophic loss and he was appropriately unsatisfied with having had to run it at all. General Hammond can facilitate. He's been read into today's situation since the first unscheduled activation. He looked at Austin. You need medical. I need coffee, Austin said. We have both. O'Neill looked at the gate room around them, the civilians, the return personnel, the systematic post-mission activity of a facility that processed extraordinary events and continued functioning. Debrief in 1 hour. There's a lot to talk about. There is, Austin said. Above them, in the alien outer system of P4X-774 star, a Hatak held position in the cold between worlds. Its commander stood at a viewport and looked at the planet below, and on his face was the expression of a man who had encountered something today that was not in his models, and who found that genuinely interesting. Baal was patient. He had time. The debrief lasted 3 hours, which was longer than standard and shorter than the situation deserved. Level 22's primary conference room had been reconfigured to accommodate the unusual composition of the assembled parties. SG-1 on one side of the table, Austin and Jaime on the other, Goldman at the end with a legal pad that was filling with notes in his precise handwriting, and General George Hammond at the head, video conferenced from his Pentagon office with the expression of a man who had been briefed on the morning's events in real time and had spent the intervening period deciding how he felt about them. He had settled on a controlled concern that communicated itself through the deliberate evenness of his voice and the careful way he chose every word. Let me be certain I have the complete picture, Hammond said from the screen. General Austin and MS. Sommers accompanied SG-1 through the Stargate to P4X-774, engaged Jaffa forces under the command of the Goa'uld System Lord Baal, facilitated the extraction of 3 SGC personnel and approximately 300 civilians, and have subsequently been identified by Baal's sensor array as individuals of specific interest to a System Lord who is, by all accounts, one of the most dangerous and persistent enemies this program has faced. That's accurate, sir, O'Neill said. Hammond was quiet for a moment. Jack. Sir. When I authorized an inspection tour of this facility, I had a specific set of outcomes in mind. I understand that, sir. None of those outcomes involved a System Lord. They rarely do, sir. That's sort of the nature of System Lords. Hammond looked at Austin directly. General Austin. I want to hear from you. Not a formal report, I'll have that in writing by end of day. I want to hear from you personally how you assess what happened today and what you believe its implications are going forward. Austin had sat through the debrief with the focused patience of a field operative processing a significant volume of new information and organizing it against the framework of his own experience. He had asked precise questions at specific moments. The Goa'uld host mechanics, the nature of Baal's cloning, the SGC's existing protocols for operatives who had been identified by System Lords, the Tok'ra's intelligence assessment of Baal's current operational priorities. He had listened to Carter's technical breakdown of the Teltac engagement and TLC's assessment of the Jaffa ground forces with equal attention. He had said nothing that wasn't necessary and had missed nothing that was. The program is extraordinary, Austin said, addressing Hammond with the directness of one senior officer to another. The scope of the threat, the resources being applied against it, the results your people are achieving, it's the most significant defense operation I've encountered in my career, and my career has not been short on significant operations. He paused. The immediate implication is straightforward. Baal has censored data on 2 individuals whose biometric profile doesn't match anything in his existing models. He's identified us as something worth investigating and he has the patience and resources to pursue that investigation. That makes us a liability to this program if we return to our previous operational roles and a potential asset if we're integrated into a structure that can manage the exposure. Hammond absorbed this. You're describing a situation in which your continued separation from the SGC creates more risk than your continued involvement. Yes, sir. Baal knows we exist. He knows we came through the gate with an SG team. Separating us from the program doesn't make us invisible to him. It just makes us targets without support. Austin looked at Goldman briefly. Oscar has already identified this. He was running the same calculation during the debrief. Goldman, who had in fact been running exactly that calculation, confirmed it with the minimal nod of a man who preferred not to be caught thinking out loud. There's also the question of the bionics themselves, Carter said, with the controlled enthusiasm of a scientist who had been sitting on a series of observations for 3 hours and was finally at the appropriate point in the conversation to raise them. The interaction between Steve's, General Austin's, bionic systems and the Gates Naquadah field produced a resonance we haven't documented before. His arm is shielded against electrical discharge at a level that absorbs staff weapon energy within a functional threshold. Jaime's bionic ear detected the Hotak sublight drive activation from the planet's surface before our instruments caught it. She looked at Hammond on the screen. From a purely technical standpoint, their bionic systems complement SGC field operations in ways that conventional human augmentation doesn't. The OSI engineering is terrestrial but it's sophisticated enough to interact with alien technology in ways we should study. Carefully, Jaime said. Carter looked at her. Of course. I mean that genuinely, not cautiously, Jaime clarified. If the interaction between our systems and the Gates field is producing effects we don't understand, studying it carefully isn't bureaucratic caution, it's the right approach. We don't know what happens to a bionic system that's exposed to a Naquadah field repeatedly over time. We don't know what the staff weapon impact did to the structural integrity of the arm at a component level beyond the self-diagnostic readout. She looked at Carter with the directness of a person who had spent decades being the subject of medical and technical assessments and had learned to participate in them rather than simply endure them. I'd like to understand what happened to us today before we consider what happens next. Carter nodded, and the nod had genuine respect in it. Agreed. I'd like to run a full technical assessment, non-invasive, with your consent. And Dr. Lamb will want the medical side. That's fine, Jaime said. O'Neill had been watching this exchange with the expression of a man who was making a decision rather than the expression of a man who had already made one, which was unusual enough that TLC noticed it and filed the observation. O'Neill's decisions were generally made quickly and defended consistently. The expression he was wearing now was more deliberate, which meant the decision had more variables than usual. "There's something else," O'Neill said. He looked at Austin. "You asked, in the armory, what kind of threat level Baal represents. I gave you the tactical answer. I want to give you the fuller answer now that you've seen the operation." "Go ahead," Austin said. "Baal is not the only system lord. He's not the only galactic threat. The Ori are conducting a religious crusade that makes the Goa'uld look like a neighborhood dispute. The Wraith in the Pegasus galaxy have been culling human populations for 10,000 years and they're awake and actively hostile to our people on Atlantis. The replicators, when they were active, nearly ended the Asgard civilization." O'Neill leaned forward. "What I'm saying is that today was not an unusual day for this program. Today was a Tuesday. We go through that gate, we face what's out there, we bring our people home, and we do it again the next day. That's the job." He looked at Austin steadily. "You handled a Tuesday. The question I'm sitting with is whether you want to handle more of them." The conference room was quiet in the way it had been quiet after Carter's first briefing image of the Stargate that morning, the quiet of people waiting for a response to something that mattered. Austin looked at Jaime. Not for permission and not for confirmation, for the check-in that people who had been through significant things together exchanged when the next significant thing was presenting itself for a decision. She met his eyes and the look that passed between them covered a great deal of ground very efficiently. "We'll need to discuss the OSI reporting structure," Austin said, returning his attention to Hammond on the screen. "Oscar's program has obligations that don't disappear because the scope of the picture has expanded. There are assets, operations, and responsibilities that require continuity." "Understood," Hammond said. "Those conversations will happen at the appropriate level. The Bionics assessments that Carter described, those are reasonable requests and will cooperate. But the data belongs to OSI as well as SGC and that has to be formalized." "Also reasonable," Hammond said. "And I want full operational briefings before gate travel. Not summaries, full briefings. Everything your people know about the destination, the threat environment, the available support. No inspection tour protocol. If we're going through that gate, we go as part of the operation, not as observers." Hammond looked at O'Neill. O'Neill looked at Austin. "Deal," O'Neill said. Hammond's expression settled into something that, for a man of his controlled bearing, constituted warmth. "General Austin. I have been running this program, in various capacities, since before the word extraordinary stopped covering what we deal with here. I have seen remarkable people do remarkable things through that gate. Today was not an anomaly." He paused. "Welcome to the SGC." Austin accepted this with the gravity it deserved. Beside him, Jaime Sommers looked at the Stargate. Visible through the conference room window that overlooked the gate room below, with the expression of someone who had spent her career adapting to the extraordinary and had just discovered that the definition of that word was considerably more expansive than she had previously understood. Goldman closed his legal pad. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, which was his equivalent of Austin looking at his empty coffee mug. The gesture of a man making peace with a situation that had moved beyond his original operational parameters and deciding to move with it. "I'll need a secure line," he said. "And an office." "Level 18 has space," O'Neill said. "Fair warning, the coffee on that level comes from the same machine as level 11 and it's been a problem since 2001. "I've worked in worse conditions," Goldman said. "You haven't worked here yet," Daniel said, not unkindly. The debrief resolved itself into the post-meeting dispersal of a group that had more to do than the meeting had covered, which was always the case at the SGC. Carter moved immediately toward the technical assessment protocols she was already drafting in her head. TLC departed with the purposeful quiet of a man who had formed his own assessment of the day's new additions and was satisfied with it. Daniel stopped to speak with the P4X-774 village representative who had been waiting in the auxiliary briefing room with a patience that suggested the gate transit had recalibrated their sense of what was and wasn't surprising. O'Neill walked with Austin and Jaime down the corridor toward the infirmary, where Dr. Lamb was preparing the medical assessment that everyone involved understood was not optional regardless of how it was framed. Question, Austin said. Yeah. The gate travel. The dematerialization and rematerialization. Does it get easier? O'Neill considered this with the genuine thoughtfulness of a man who had stepped through the gate more times than he had ever expected to when the program began. You stop noticing the cold, he said. Eventually. How long does that take? Couple hundred trips, O'Neill said. Give or take. Austin processed this. And Baal. When he comes back. He will come back, O'Neill said. He always comes back. That's the thing about Baal, he's remarkably difficult to finish. We've had the conversation more times than I care to count. He glanced at Austin. But he's never had to account for a variable like you two. That's going to cost him something before this is done. They reached the infirmary corridor. The sounds of the mountain surrounded them. The ventilation, the distant movement of personnel, the subtle harmonic of Naquata technology that Jaime could hear and Austin could feel through his arm and which neither of them had noticed they were already beginning to accept as background. The SGC continued its operations around them with the organized momentum of a program that did not pause for adaptation periods, because the gate did not pause, and the universe beyond it did not pause, and the job was continuous in the way that only the most significant jobs are continuous, not as burden but as purpose, the specific gravity of work that matters pulling everything toward it. In the gate room below, Sergeant Harriman ran a routine diagnostic on the dialing computer. The chevrons sat inert in their housing, waiting. They were always waiting. Somewhere in the ancient database on level 18, a set of coordinates that Carter had flagged 3 weeks ago and not yet had time to investigate sat in a mission queue alongside 47 others, each representing a world that had not yet been visited, a first contact that had not yet been made, a threat or an ally or a discovery that existed beyond the event horizon of the next established wormhole. The SGC's records, updated that evening by Sergeant Harriman with his characteristic thoroughness, would include 2 new entries in the personnel files: provisional operational status, bionic augmentation noted, Baal threat assessment attached, Carter's technical report pending. The entries were brief, as early entries always were, because the full measure of what a person contributed to the program was written in mission logs and after-action reports over time, not in initial assessments. But Hammond, reviewing the day's summary from his Pentagon office before he closed his files for the evening, paused at the 2 new entries for longer than he paused at most things. He had run this program through Apophis and Anubis and the Replicators and the Ori. He had sent good people through that gate and had not always gotten all of them back, and he carried that with the weight that commanders carry the irreducible costs of the work they authorize. He had also seen the Gate network expand Earth's understanding of the universe in ways that no single human lifespan was sufficient to fully process. He knew what it looked like when someone walked through that gate for the first time and understood, at the level below words, that they were not going to walk away from it. He had seen it in Jack O'Neill. He had seen it in Samantha Carter. He had seen it in Daniel Jackson, who had been through the gate and through death and back and through the gate again and showed no signs of stopping. He had seen it in TLC, who had crossed the most profound threshold of all, not through the gate but away from everything he had known and towards something he chose to build. He had seen it today in Stephen Austin standing at the base of the ramp with his bionic eye processing the Stargate and the particular stillness of a man understanding that the limits of the world had just been redrawn around him. The program continued. The gate waited. There were more worlds to find. What began as a scheduled inspection of Cheyenne Mountain's most classified facility ended as something the SGC's mission logs had never recorded before. The integration of Earth's first bionically augmented operatives into the Gate program's operational structure. Steve Austin and Jaime Sommers had walked into the mountain as visitors and walked out as something the personnel files were still finding language to describe. Baal had returned to the outer system and calculated. The SGC knew he would move again. The System Lord's interest in Austin and Jaime's biometric signatures was not tactical curiosity but something closer to recognition, the response of a being who understood that Earth's capabilities had expanded in a direction he had not modeled. That miscalculation would cost him, in the way all miscalculations about Earth's capacity to produce remarkable people eventually cost those who made them. Oscar Goldman requisitioned office space on level 18 and began the quiet, methodical work of integrating OSI's operational knowledge with the SGC's galactic threat picture, finding in that intersection more overlap than either organization had previously suspected. The alien technology OSI had encountered in the field over decades, unidentified, unexplained, filed and classified, was beginning to resolve into something intelligible against the backdrop of the Gate network. Carter's technical assessment of the Bionic system's interaction with Naquata technology was 3 weeks from producing a finding that would change how she thought about the interface between human engineering and ancient design principles. The Gate room's chevrons waited, as they always did, for the next address. Somewhere, they were already being dialed. Indeed. More stories await.